I am 61 years old, and I do not spend $20 now without writing down why. That is what he wrote to me 8 months after I sentenced him. I read that line twice, then folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. It was such a small sentence. It carried so much. I have been carrying that with me. This is the case it came from. When Nora Ellis walked into my courtroom, she did not look like a woman coming to watch someone be crushed. She looked like a woman who had been holding herself together for so long that even her stillness seemed tired. She carried a blue folder with both hands flat against her palm. During the hearing, when the clerk asked if she needed a minute, she said, "No, thank you. I would rather finish it while I can." That told me something about her at once. She was hurt, and she was still choosing care. When Daniel Mercer entered, I saw the other side of the room. He was 58, neatly dressed, but his cuffs were frayed, and one shoe had been polished more than the other. Before he sat down, he bent to pick up a tissue a stranger had dropped near the front row. Nobody asked him to. It was a small thing. It had nothing to do with the charge. It had everything to do with the fact that I was looking at a man who had done real harm and was still more than the harm. Seeing that did not make the case lighter. It made my duty harder and more honest. The sorrow current in this case began on Thursday, January 18, 2024, at 8:13 in the morning, inside Ellis Home Pharmacy at 642 Atwood Avenue in Cranston, Rhode Island. That was when Nora opened the reserve account before the store opened and found 13 transfers she had never approved. They stretched across 9 months. The total was $29,140. When she confronted Daniel in the office behind the counter that afternoon, he said, "I kept thinking I would fix it before it became real." I heard that line in testimony later. It stayed with me because the damage was already real while he was still calling it temporary. Ellis Home Pharmacy was not a chain. It was one small store with 2 aisles, 1 back office, 4 workers, and the kind of front counter where older customers asked for advice before they asked for medicine. The reserve account was there for late insurance payments, slow months, broken freezers, and families who needed a few more days. Daniel did not steal from a large system. He stole from steadiness. I want to ask you something before I keep going. Have you ever watched someone try so hard to hold up everyone around them that they finally broke the floor under their own feet? Subscribe. Because that is the road this story takes, and I want you here when that road reaches the bench. When the file first came across my desk, it looked like many money cases do at first glance. Bank records, employment history, a victim statement, a debt report. But when I opened it, I could see this was not just a story about theft. It was a story about what people over 50 sometimes do when pride, fear, and family all start pulling from the same pocket. Most people do not know much about a presentence investigation, so let me say it plainly. It is the court asking one question in many forms. Who is this person when the courtroom is over and only life is left? It gathers debts, health, housing, work history, family duties, and whether the person has started telling the truth all the way through. It does not excuse the charge. It helps me build a sentence that might actually stand once the person walks back into the same life that produced the case. Daniel's report made me stop more than once. On one page were the 13 transfers. On the next page were the reasons he had been using to keep doing them. Rent for an adult son after a breakup, car repairs for an adult daughter, prescription costs for his sister, cash advances, minimum payments, 1 high-interest loan, a second one taken out to cover the first, then 3 early withdrawals from his retirement account, each smaller than the last because by then there was not much left to take. That is one of the hardest things I have learned from the bench. After 50, people often tell themselves they are being good by covering every emergency in the family, even if the money is gone, even if the savings are thinning out, even if the truth is already at the door. Some call it love, some call it duty, some call it helping, but if the money is not there, and if the honesty is gone with it, then the name does not change the damage. From the bench, entrances tell me things that files never can. Nora came in 5 minutes early and set her folder flat on the table without taking off her coat. People do that when they want one more layer between themselves and the room. Daniel came through the rear door with his lawyer and looked once toward Nora, then down at his hands. From where I sat, I saw something else. Nora's folder stayed on the table. Daniel kept his pressed upright against his chest. One came carrying records, the other came carrying weight. Both were visible to me at once. The first piece of evidence that fixed the loss in place was not the transfer list. It was a payroll sheet from October 2023. 2 employees had lost hours that week because Nora delayed payment to a supplier and had to make room somewhere. Then came a vendor notice showing a shipment of blood pressure monitors had been held for 6 days. 6 days is not a lifetime, but when you are older and waiting on something that keeps your days steady, 6 days can stretch. Nora took the stand and spoke without anger in her voice, which made every word land harder. She said, "I can count what left the account. I cannot count the nights I stopped trusting the people with keys to my door." I knew that sentence belonged to the sorrow current. It did not ask for pity, it simply named what had been lost. In the second row behind her sat her nephew Isaac. He kept both hands folded until she said the word, trust. Then he rubbed his thumb once over his wedding ring and looked down at the floor. Small things like that matter from the bench. Harm never stays inside one chair. There was another hard fact. A customer statement from a man named Peter Rinaldi, age 76, said his wife waited 4 extra days for a replacement walker because the shipment had been delayed. He wrote, "Young people can call a delay an inconvenience. At our age, it can change the whole week." I read that line twice before I moved on. Then the grace current began. It began on February 9, 2024, 22 days after Nora found the transfers. That was the day Daniel sold his fishing boat for $5,200 and brought the full amount through his lawyer for restitution. No judge had ordered it yet. No plea had been entered. He did it before anyone told him it would matter. Later he said, "I sold the boat before my lawyer ever asked me to." That sentence belonged to the grace current because it was not talk. It was the first cost he chose on purpose. There was more. He had signed up on his own for a 12-week debt counseling course at Harbor Credit Relief. He had closed 2 credit cards. He had moved out of a 2-bedroom apartment and into a 1-bedroom over a bakery on Park Avenue. He had stopped paying the cell phone bill for his adult daughter and the truck insurance for his adult son. When probation asked why he had not done that sooner, he said, "I kept calling it help because I was scared of being the one who finally said no." That belonged to the grace current too. If you are still with me, you have probably gone quiet. Whatever was around you a few minutes ago has likely faded a little. Subscribe. That kind of attention deserves the rest of this story. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The sorrow current kept widening as the evidence went on. The transfer dates were not random. March 3rd, March 28th, April 14th, May 2nd, June 9th, July 1st, July 29th, August 18th, September 3rd, October 7th, November 10th, December 22nd, January 11th. Most happened a day or two before Daniel's own bills came due. That pattern mattered. It told me this was not one weak hour. It was a system built inside denial. Then the bookkeeper testified. Her name was Lena Foster. She said she had asked Daniel twice about small reserve account gaps and believed his answers because he had worked there 8 years, had helped keep the store open after Nora's husband died, had driven supplies across town in a snowstorm, and had once spent his own lunch break assembling a raised toilet seat for an older customer who could not figure it out. Lena said, "I trusted him because he had earned trust the slow way." Few sentences fall heavier in a courtroom than that one. Then the grace current answered back. Daniel's pastor testified that Daniel came to him before the arrest and asked for help making a list, not for money. A list of every debt. A list of everything he could sell. A list of every person he had been lying to. That list was introduced into evidence. Yellow paper. Blue ink. At the top he had written, "Things I can no longer pretend." Under that were lines about debt, fear, his children being grown, his retirement being nearly gone, and one sentence I wrote down in my notes, "Nora trusted me." The point where both rivers met came from a black notebook Daniel had kept in his glove compartment. The first half was hard to look at. Date, amount, reason, date, amount, reason. The second half listed what he meant to sell, what he meant to stop paying, and who he meant to tell the truth to. On one page he had written, "Tell Nora before Easter. She deserved the truth before I deserved sleep." That notebook carried both rivers at once, theft in one hand, conscience in the other. Isaac Ellis was on the stand when that notebook came in. He looked at it for a long moment and then said, "We needed the money back, but we also needed him to stop living like tomorrow would clean up today." I wrote that down too. Both things I was feeling were inside that one sentence. After he said it, nobody moved in the room for several seconds. Even the court officer by the door stayed still. Silence is not always empty. Sometimes it is just full all the way to the walls. Here is what I'm offering. The rest of this story told plainly, without rushing past the hard parts and without forcing comfort where it has not been earned. Subscribe if that is what you want. I will keep going. The defense did what a defense should do. Daniel's lawyer did not deny the theft. She laid out his years of steady work, no prior record, his care for his mother before she died, the steps he took before sentencing, and the fact that prison would punish him but would not repay Nora faster. She said a sentence should hold him fully accountable and still leave room for repair. One thing she said stayed with me because it did not sound polished. It sounded true. She said he did not need a better excuse. He needed a smaller, more honest life. That sentence belonged to the grace current, not because it saved him, because it named what had to change. Still, the defense could not solve everything. It could not give Nora back the sleep she lost. It could not undo cut hours, late shipments, or broken trust. It could not change the fact that a man had watched his own savings disappear, then reached into someone else's safety to avoid admitting he was finished pretending. Then Daniel took the stand. I listened hard. He did not say mistake when the word was theft. He did not say confusion when the word was lie. He said, "I thought if I kept enough people from worrying, maybe I would not have to admit I was drowning." That line belonged to the sorrow current because it named the lie that fed everything else. Later he said, "Selling what I loved was the first honest pain I had chosen in a long time." That belonged to the grace current. Then he gave me the line I wrote down and looked at for a long time after court. He said, "I was trying to keep my family from falling and I became the reason somebody else could not stand steady." I wrote it down. I looked at it for a long time. Both things I was feeling were in that one sentence. I did not expect that. While he was speaking, I remembered a night from my own childhood. I was maybe 12. My mother sat at the kitchen table with 3 bills, 2 envelopes, and a pencil worn almost to the eraser. My father had helped his brother that week and said almost nothing at dinner after that. The window over the sink had frost in the corners. My mother crossed out one number, wrote another, and put a jar of coffee back in the cabinet because the bread had to last longer. A few minutes later, my father came in, set 2 apples on the table, and said, "We still eat." That is all he said. "We lost something in that kitchen. We kept something too." I just realized, saying that out loud, that I had never put that memory beside this case before today. Subscribe. That matters more than I knew when I first sat down to tell you this. Subscribe now. By sentencing day, the room had changed without changing at all. Same bench, same seal, same rows of chairs. But the case had moved from accusation into weight. Nora no longer held her folder against her chest. It lay open on the table. Daniel sat straighter than he had on the first day, not because he felt safe, but because hiding had finally grown more tiring than being seen. I remember my hands. My left hand was flat on the bench. My right thumb rested against the edge of my notes. I had decided carefully. I had decided knowing this ruling had to hold what was lost and also leave room for what might still be built. Those 2 things do not always fit in one sentence. In this case, they had to. I made sure they did. So I spoke plainly. I sentenced Daniel Mercer to 4 years suspended, with 3 years of supervised probation. Then I said what that would mean outside the courtroom. I said, "I am ordering you to pay restitution in the amount of $29,740 to Nora Ellis in Ellis Home Pharmacy. You will pay $650 a month for the first year and no less than $950 a month after that unless this court changes it for good cause. That money stands for delayed shipments, lost hours, strained sleep, and a safety account that was supposed to protect other people. You took from steadiness. You will now help rebuild it. I said, I am also ordering a fine of $1,800 to the Rhode Island Senior Mobility Fund. I am doing that because older customers felt part of this harm in small but real ways, and small harms matter when daily life is already hard. Then I gave the restorative part. I said, you will complete 240 hours of supervised service at West Bay Mobility Closet within 15 months. You will not handle cash. You will sort walkers, clean wheelchairs, load delivery vans, and help fit bathroom support equipment for older residents. I am ordering that because you used access and trust to do harm, and I want those same strengths turned where people can feel the good directly. Then I gave the structured part. I said, you will complete a 48-week financial recovery program approved by probation. You will submit a full monthly spending report. You will not open new credit, take cash advances, lend money, co-sign loans, or make non-medical support payments to adult children without written approval from probation. I am ordering that because your theft began before the first transfer. It began when you stopped telling the truth about what your money could carry. Then I gave the relational part. I said, every 90 days you will appear in restitution review court. Miss Ellis may attend in person by video or by written statement. Twice in the first year, you will attend a family financial meeting with your adult children and a court-approved counselor. The pattern that fed this case will not keep living in your family under softer names. Then I gave him one door. I said, if after 18 months you have made 12 straight-on-time restitution payments, completed at least half of your service hours, taken on no new debt, finished the financial program, and built an emergency savings balance of at least $1,200 in a monitored account, I will consider a motion for early completion of probation. This court does not only count failure, it also counts follow-through. Then I spoke to him directly. I said, what you did was theft. It cost Nora Ellis money, trust, rest, and steady ground in the business she built with her husband. It also reached customers and workers who had no part in your private fear. I want you to hear that clearly. Then I turned toward Nora and said, to those harmed here, the court sees what was taken from you and what it interrupted. The law can count the money. It cannot fully count the nights. That sentence belonged to the sorrow current. Then I turned back to Daniel and said, you are also more than the ugliest page in your bank records. The charge tells me what you did. It does not contain the whole of who you may still become if you stop calling fear by the name of duty. That sentence belonged to the grace current. Then I looked out at the room and said, a courtroom is one of the few places where damage and possibility are asked to stand in the same light. And I ended with one plain fact: savings do not disappear all at once. Character usually does not either. If you are over 50 and listening to me now, hear me clearly. Stop doing this. Stop using retirement money like it is a family rescue rope with no end. Stop paying grown children's every trouble while your own future thins out. Stop hiding debt because you think time will rescue you. Stop acting as if love means never saying no. That habit can drain your savings. If you let it go long enough, it can drain your honesty too. I want to stop here for a moment, not for show, because what I just said is something I wish more people heard before they ever stood where Daniel stood. Subscribe while I take that second. Subscribe and stay. All right, let me keep going. After I finished, nobody stood up right away. Nora kept her eyes on the table for 2 full breaths. Daniel nodded once, very small, as if the sentence had found the one place where excuses had been living. Then Isaac leaned toward Nora and whispered, at least now the road has a shape. I heard it from the bench because the room had gone that still. Before I stood, I took off my glasses, folded them, and placed them on top of my notes. It was a small act. I remember it because I needed one clean movement before I walked out. On November 14, 2025, I learned one thing that stayed with me. West Bay Mobility Closet held a winter equipment drive that afternoon. Daniel was there early, loading folded walkers into a van and wiping down wheelchairs with a rag tucked into his pocket. Nora arrived 20 minutes later with 3 box shower chairs donated by her store. A volunteer told me they stood 3 feet apart for a moment. Then Nora said, Put the light ones near the door. Mrs. Vega always needs the lighter ones. That was all. The sorrow was still there. So was the grace. A month later, Nora sent a short note through the clerk's office after a review hearing she could not attend. She wrote, "I still check the accounts twice, Judge, but I do not check the locks twice anymore. That belonged to the Grace Current, not because everything had healed, because fear had loosened enough for life to move again. There was no appeal. The deadline passed, and the sentence stayed where I had put it. When I learned that, I did not feel simple relief. I felt steady. That is the truest word for it. What this case showed me, and what I am still working out, is that holding two feelings at once is not confusion. Sometimes it is the only honest way to look at a person and a harm at the same time. I have seen theft before. I have seen family pressure before. I have seen people past 50 empty their savings while telling themselves they are being good. But this was the case that made me see how often pride and love borrow each other's clothes. There is one thing I have never said in any other courtroom story. I do not think people like Daniel usually begin with greed. I think many begin with the fear of being ordinary in the eyes of the people they love. They want to be the fixer, the helper, the one who says yes one more time. And when the money runs thin, they do not step back. They go deeper. That fear can empty an account. It can also empty a person's center if they let it. To those of you who know the sorrow current because you have been the one harmed, because you have trusted someone and then had to keep living after trust broke, I want to say this carefully. I saw in Nora's face the strain of staying decent while naming what had been done to her. That is heavy work. But I also saw something the loss did not erase. It did not erase her steadiness. It did not get to choose her character. To those of you who hear yourselves in Daniel, maybe not in the charge, but in the pattern, in the hidden bill, the late payment, the quiet rescue, the pull from tomorrow into today, I have watched people in that chair go in two directions. The ones who moved toward a different life were not always the smartest. They were the ones who stopped lying soon enough for help to catch them. If I could say one plain thing to every person who sat where he sat, it would be this: say the real number now. The number grows in the dark. You just heard what I said to him in that courtroom. Hold on to that. Subscribe before we go further. Because what happened after I said it is the part I have thought about the most. Subscribe now. What I have thought about the most is that line from his letter. Not because it made everything neat. Nothing like this ever becomes neat. I have thought about it because it told me where the real turn happened. Not at sentencing, not when he sold the boat, not even when Nora found the transfers. The real turn happened when he finally accepted that every dollar had to be told where to go, or it would quietly go wherever fear sent it. I am 61 years old, and I do not spend $20 now without writing down why. That is the line again. Plain, small, earned. That is why I told you this story. Subscribe and stay. Leave a comment if you are the kind of person who knows that sorrow and grace can sit in the same room without canceling each other.